Good morning, John Mutchler here from the Ferndale Alliance Church. We're continuing our look at Matthew 5, verse 9, the words of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. We're talking about being at peace with God, at peace with others, at peace with ourselves. And I want to talk about sleepwalking for a moment. Have you ever sleepwalked? Millions of Americans, some 8 or 9 million Americans sleepwalk. It means they do things while they are unconscious and sleeping that you would normally do while you're awake. They'll get in their car and drive somewhere. They'll go downstairs and make an entire meal and not remember it. Sometimes they will go to the bathroom in the wrong room, or it's been known that people have killed their partners while they're sleeping. By the way, note to self, make sure that you and your spouse are getting along well before you go to sleep. So remember that for a moment. Now, have you ever had an experience, maybe you don't sleepwalk, but you've had an experience while you're dreaming, and in the narration of the dream, you want to go somewhere. You yourself in the dream as a participant want to get up, you want to move, you want to go see somebody, but you feel frozen, you feel stuck, your muscles tighten up, and you're sort of in that funny place of asleep but being awake, and you're aware that you just physically can't move. Well, I'm not an expert in this, but it is my understanding that that is a mechanism in our rather complex brain that generally keeps us from sleepwalking. Our brains allow us to dream without leaving them out physically, but when that mechanism isn't quite working at the right time or correctly, then we find ourselves trying to get up and move. And if it's working correctly, we can't move. And if we're in between sleep and awake, we feel that sense of helplessness. And that's the point. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. We looked yesterday at James 4, verse 1, that tells us the source of our conflict. And we want to think that conflict begins external to us. Somebody did something to us. Somebody wronged us, and that's why we have a conflict. James says the source of conflict is inside of us. He asks the question, what is the source of fightings and quarrels? Is it not that inner battle? Is it not unmet expectations? Is it not desires that you have not been able to fulfill? And so it begins with, maybe these are good desires. Desire to be recognized or honored or acknowledged or respected, or to win or to come out on top, or to lead or be in charge. We don't achieve what our hearts desire, and so something happens inside and it leads to, or at least contributes to, conflict. In other words, it's coveting. It's wanting something that we think we have a right to have, and we don't get it. So remember that word coveting for a moment. We're going to look at a passage of Paul, one of my favorite passages because it describes me so much. Romans chapter 7. Romans 7 deals with this battle, the battle of knowing the things we're supposed to do, knowing how we're supposed to feel inside, knowing the emotions that are positive that we should be embracing and living, but we just can't. We can't do what we know we're supposed to do, and we can't be the people we're supposed to be. There is this constant battle that seems to be centered around the law, those principles, whether they are the Old Testament principles or things we learn from society, the rules of the road. Go 25 miles an hour, and somehow we're always tempted to go 30 or 35, or just things that we grew up, or things that are in our hearts, even our own personal standards. If you're a perfectionist, you know what we're talking about, the standards that we have. We just don't live up to those standards. Paul talks about that battle in Romans chapter 7. Listen to these words. What shall we say then? Verse 7, chapter 7, verse 7. Is the law sinful? Are these principles of life, are they the problem? Should we not have them? The alternative would be anarchy. We, of course, should have standards and principles. I would not have known what sin was had it not been for the law. We can deal with the problem. We deal with the sickness when we know what the problem is. The law, whether it's internal or external, tells us what our problem is, what our sin is. In fact, Paul uses an illustration. He goes right to the 10 Commandments. I would not have known what coveting really is if the law had not said, you shall not covet. It's interesting to me, it goes right to number 10. Most of the commandments deal with external behavior. Don't kill, don't lie, don't commit adultery. They're very external, visible things. But he goes to number 10, thou shalt not covet. which is what James is talking about. The heart of the matter in James chapter 4, verse 1. It's our desires that bring problems. So we're in conflict with each other and ultimately in conflict with God and ourselves. It goes on in verse 8. But sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment, produced in me every kind of coveting. In other words, the more I know about what I'm supposed to do, it seems the more I do the exact opposite. I struggle and I can't seem to get out of this mess, this bondage that I'm in. So then the law is holy and the commandment is holy. It's righteous. It's good. I think most of us would acknowledge that the 10 Commandments are pretty good. Put it this way. If the entire world followed the 10 Commandments faithfully, we would be in paradise. I think things would at least be way better off than they are right now. So did that which was good, those life-giving principles, then become death to me? Oh, no, by no means. Nevertheless, in order that sin might be recognized as sin, it used what is good to bring about my death, so that through the commandment, sin might become utterly sinful. Let me summarize that there. We know that these principles are good. They're great ends in these principles, great goals, great standards of living. But it brings about the obvious battle that we have to try to overcome them. It teaches us that we're trapped. Going back to my sleepwalking illustration, that it's that feeling of we know we should be moving, we should be doing something. There's a direction we're supposed to go, but we are just frozen. We feel that sense of incapacitation and inability. That's what our sinful nature is about. In verse 14, we know that the law is spiritual. It's good. The standards are terrific. Nothing wrong with the standards. But I am unspiritual, sold as a slave to sin. I'm stuck in that nightmare. I'm stuck in Egypt, using kind of a very important biblical metaphor of Israel's captivity in Egypt for over 400 years. They were stuck there. Couldn't get out until what happened? Until God delivered them. The same thing happens to us. We have to be delivered as well. So I'm going to finish with my favorite part of Romans 7. I call this the Frank Sinatra part of the Bible. Frank Sinatra, probably most famous for Strangers in the Light, Stranger in the Night, and the improvised part at the end where he talks about, where he goes doobie doobie doo, doobie doobie doo. Anyway, you'll get this in a second here. Paul says, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. For I know that the law itself I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep doing. Now if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it. So I find this law at work. Although I want to do good, evil is right there with me. I lost track of how many do's there are in there. I mean, you heard the do's in there. Lots of them, over 20 of them. And the problem is we become obsessed with doing, here's the principle, we become obsessed with outward behavior, which is important, by the way. If James teaches us anything, that doing good things are still important, but it has to come from a heart that's right and a heart that's victorious. I think that's why he goes on and says this. For in my inner being, I delight in God's law. It's good. But I see another principle at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of making me prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. Again, that's sleepwalking. I know what I want to do and should be doing, but I just can't do it. Then verse 24, you'll recognize these words. Wretched man that I am. Wretched man that I am. And this is where John Newton got the words for probably the most famous Christian hymn, Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. This is where he gets this language. John Newton, the slave trader, looked at his life and go, whoa, what a mess I've made. What a wretch I am. And it's only grace that saves us. He ends with a question here. Paul says, who will rescue this body that is subject to death? And he says this beautiful ending here. Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord. He provides his own answer. Who delivers me? God delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord. Now, I know there's a lot of controversy whether Paul is talking about a life here as a Christian, this is Christian experience, or some will argue this is pre-Christian experience. Doesn't matter. As Yogi Bear, the catcher from the Yankees, said one time, if you reach a fork in the road, take it. Doesn't matter which direction you go. If this applies to you, it applies to you, whether you are a Christian or thinking about being a Christian. If this sounds like you struggle with doing the right thing, this is meant for you. Deliverance comes through Jesus Christ. That's who delivers us. We're going to talk more about that tomorrow, but thank you today for listening. Feel free to share this. Have a great and blessed day today as you walk in peace.